If the PVHA will not regulate tree disputes, what should happen when they occur in terms of the process?
Wow, that's a very loaded question if they won't regulate them, because that's their number one line of mission, their business. It says so on the audited financial reports, to enforce deed restrictions. And if you read these CCNRs, that is their job. So if they don't enforce it, what ends up happening is neighbors have to fight it out in the streets among themselves, or go to court to fight in court. Or as has happened with the encroachments that John had, he had to be in court for 10, 11 years fighting someone else that was encroaching something if your PVHA fails to support you in something and do something right. So unfortunately, that causes a terrible division in the community. It costs millions of dollars. As we've seen, it was over $1.1 million in legal fees and has almost bankrupted the HOA here. The consequences are very painful. It pits neighbor against neighbor. I think it's not a good idea to not enforce what you're supposed to do, what your number one line of business is to do.
Okay, great, thank you. Dick?
I think no matter what, you have tremendous controversy and you wind up with neighbor against neighbor. I think our role, my understanding is that in California, you do not have a right to a view. We will give you the right because we will define that you have that right in PVE and Miralest. And even though Miralest is different because they've got, RPV does have a view resolution or view ordinance. So we will define that you have a right to a view. We will define a process that we suggest you follow, which starts with trying to work it out with the neighbor. If you can't work it out, we suggest that you hire a mediator. If you can't work it out with the mediator, then you go to court. But for us to get involved means that all you people out there that may not have views, that your money is now going to be spent on lawsuits for the people that do. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But Marlene or Gay talks about bankrupting. I mean, that's down the road. So our current lawyer tried to mitigate the problem by limiting the number of views that you could even talk about to adjoining, and I think that was a big mistake.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, the premise on that rewrite in the spring was to try to eliminate the number of things that could be disputed, and I don't think that's the answer. I do agree with Gain. It is a responsibility of the PVHA to try to help resolve these things. The current process actually does protect the PVHA because you sign a waiver that says that you're not going to sue the PVHA, and so that's not our problem. The things that we've been sued about relate to things that are really bad decisions as opposed to specific decisions on trees and views. I think there does need to be a process, and I think that people need to be, try to work it out. I think what Dick said is the appropriate set of things. We need to clarify how you decide how you balance trees and views, and have that all written down, and then try to go through a mediator. I think we can facilitate finding a mediator. But ultimately, that's to be worked out between the various people. I think we also can guide people to say, when you move into a house, take a lot of pictures, and I think you should be able to preserve the view that you see when you have the house. I don't think people should be buying a house and then going around and cutting down all their neighbors' trees in order to create views that were really not there when you bought the house. But I think you do have an opportunity to preserve what you have at the time you buy the house.
Thank you. Reed?
Yes, I think there's a clarification and with the views that there's really two types. Ones that might be obstructed on someone's personal property on their own lot versus maybe obstruction that's on parkland or right-of-way, that's public land. And so sometimes I've seen where people have come to the PVHA and actually it really involves a tree that's on right-of-way and not really on a individual lot. And so people should understand that there's currently like two requirements or two kind of sets of restrictions on how to resolve that. They aren't exactly alike, and I think we should try to make an effort to have the efforts to resolve the way it's done by the city as opposed to the PVHA. They should be more similar. We should have a way of doing it. I also think with mediation, in the past, the PVHA has allowed for that. They had an attorney that provided mediation. They no longer do. I think I've actually gone through the mediation process. I think it was helpful. I think it's hard sometimes if you don't have any success in I think most of us has probably been through this process either on one side or the other, either trying to protect our privacy or trying to protect our views. And in doing so, it can be challenging. And I think by having someone like a mediator, like the PVHA, to step in, I think can be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
I realize that conflicts between neighbors can be very complicated. They're between views and trees. It's complex and it's unique to the situation. So I agree with what Dick had mentioned. It's important to have a clear-cut process of how addressing it from beginning to end. Hopefully we don't get to the end point where the end point is legal action against one's neighbor. So having a clear-cut process would be helpful in taking small steps before we get there.
Okay.
Now, as far as developing baseline, to be able to capture what we had bought into. So if you bought an expensive home with a great view, you should be able to capture a baseline of what you had purchased into. So I think it's important to document what the kind of views or trees you have. So those are my thoughts in terms of views versus trees.
Okay. Thank you. Marlene?
Okay, we're in my wheelhouse here. There are a lot of different ways to regulate, and we've been unsuccessful in the past with some of the policies that were recently implemented at the PVHA. Actually, the majority of the view issues that have come to the PVHA while we had a mediator on staff were resolved. The amount that are serious issues that have not been able to get resolved and have gone to court, it's just a handful. It's not a large number. So overall, neighbor to neighbor, people have been able to resolve most of the issues. What we've been working on is actually clarifying what you need to define a view, to decide what the process is. Even when we talk about having a baseline view for a property, when you purchase a property, you take a picture, this is your view. But what happens if that property, if you demo the house and build a new house, do your views change? So there are a lot of complex issues, both legally and in definition-wise, that we've been working through. And I encourage everybody to send emails to the PVHA relating to views and your thoughts so that we can incorporate that important information.
Thank you.